My parents didn't realize I moved to another state because they were too focused on my golden child brother. Now that they found out I'm rich, they suddenly want to reconnect. Funny how money makes people remember you exist. I, 28M, never thought I'd be writing this. But here I am at 2 a.m., staring at my phone after the most ridiculous conversation of my life. My parents just found out I'm wealthy, and suddenly I exist again. Growing up, I was the invisible child. My brother was 3 years younger, but you'd think he was made of gold the way my parents treated him. Every achievement I had was overshadowed by whatever mediocre thing he did that week. I got straight A's? Great. But did I see how my brother scored the winning goal in his Little League game? I won the state science fair? Nice. But my brother just learned to ride his bike without training wheels. The pattern continued through high school. I graduated valedictorian and got a full scholarship to MIT. My parents attended graduation, took a few photos, then spent the entire dinner talking about my brother's upcoming senior year and his potential football scholarship. When I left for college, they drove me to the airport and reminded me to call my brother on his birthday next month. They forgot mine was the following week. College was my escape. I threw myself into computer science and entrepreneurship. While my classmates partied, I built apps and websites. I started small, fixing computers for professors, designing websites for local businesses. By junior year, I had a small team of students working with me. We created a productivity app that caught the attention of a major tech company. My parents called maybe once a semester. The conversations were always the same. Brief updates about my brother's football achievements, questions about my grades that felt more like checking boxes than genuine interest, and reminders to stay in touch with family. I'd mention my business ventures, but they'd quickly steer the conversation back to my brother's latest accomplishments. After graduation, I moved to California with my startup team. We sold our first app for a decent amount, enough to fund our next project. I called home to share the news. My mother congratulated me briefly, then spent 20 minutes telling me about my brother's new girlfriend and how proud they were that he made it onto his college football team as a walk-on. That's when I decided to stop trying so hard. I moved to Austin 2 years later when our second app really took off. We developed a cybersecurity platform that several Fortune 500 companies wanted to license. The money started flowing in faster than I'd ever imagined. I bought a house, invested wisely, and kept building. The funny thing about success is how quietly it can happen. One day you're eating ramen in a studio apartment. The next you're signing contracts worth millions. I never announced my move to Texas to my parents. I figured they'd notice eventually when I stopped answering calls from my old California number. They didn't. For 3 years, I lived in Austin. I built my company, bought a beautiful house in the hills, started dating an amazing woman who worked in biotech. My business grew from a small team to over 50 employees. We were featured in tech magazines, won industry awards, and I was invited to speak at conferences worldwide. My parents never called my new number. I'd given it to them in an email, but apparently, they never saved it. They kept calling my old California line, which I'd disconnected. When it went straight to voicemail month after month, they assumed I was just busy with work. Too busy to call their golden child, apparently. My brother graduated college and moved back home. He got a job at a local insurance company and still lived with our parents at 25. They were thrilled to have him close. I learned all this through social media and occasional calls from my aunt, who was the only family member who seemed to remember I existed. Last month, everything changed. A major business publication ran a feature story about young entrepreneurs who'd built successful companies before 30. My photo was on the cover, standing in front of my Austin office building. The article detailed my company's growth, my net worth, and my philanthropic efforts in the local community. My aunt saw it first. She called me, excited and proud, asking why I hadn't told the family about my success. I explained that I'd tried over the years, but no one seemed interested. She was quiet for a moment, then asked if my parents knew where I lived. They didn't. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was my mother, calling from a number I didn't recognize. She'd somehow tracked down my current contact information. Her voice was different, warmer, more interested than I'd heard in years. She told me how proud she was, how she'd always known I'd be successful. She asked about my house, my company, my life in Austin. For 30 minutes, she asked detailed questions about my business, my investments, my plans for the future. Then she mentioned that she and my father were thinking about visiting Austin soon. Maybe I could show them around, introduce them to my life there. She suggested they could stay with me for a week or two, really get to know the son they'd been missing. The son they'd been missing. That phrase stuck with me. I asked her when they'd realized I'd moved to Texas. There was a pause. She admitted they'd thought I was still in California, just busy with work. When I asked why they never tried harder to reach me when my old number stopped working, she got defensive. She said they figured I'd call when I had time. 3 years. 3 years of silence. And they figured I'd call when I had time. My father got on the phone next. His approach was different, but equally transparent. He talked about family, about how important it was to stay connected. He mentioned that my brother was doing well, but could use some career guidance from someone successful like me. Maybe I could help him get into tech, or perhaps there were opportunities at my company. The conversation lasted over an hour. They asked about my house, my car, my lifestyle. They wanted to know about my investments, my business partnerships, my future plans. Not once did they ask how I'd been emotionally, whether I was happy, or if I'd missed them during our years of minimal contact. When I hung up, I felt hollow. The parents who couldn't be bothered to save my new phone number were suddenly planning a visit to Austin. The next day, my brother called. This was unprecedented. He'd never called me directly in his adult life. He was friendly, almost buddy-buddy in a way that felt completely foreign. He told me how cool it was that I'd made it big, how he'd always believed in me. He asked if I remembered how close we used to be as kids. I didn't, because we weren't. He was the golden child who got all the attention while I was the responsible older brother who was expected to set a good example without any recognition. Then came his real reason for calling. He was thinking about making a career change, maybe getting into business or tech. He wondered if I had any advice, or better yet, any opportunities at my company. He'd be willing to relocate to Austin if the right position opened up. I told him I'd think about it. Over the next week, the calls kept coming. My parents called every other day, always with new questions about my success, my wealth, my business. They wanted photos of my house, details about my company's growth, information about my investment portfolio. My mother started sending me articles about family businesses, suggesting that maybe it was time to bring family into my company. She mentioned how my brother had always been good with people, how he could probably help with sales or marketing. My father sent me real estate listings in Austin, mentioning that they were thinking about relocating to be closer to me. Wouldn't it be nice to have family nearby? They could help with the business, be there for support. The manipulation was so obvious, it was almost insulting. I decided to test them. I called and told them I was planning a family reunion for next month. I'd fly everyone to Austin, put them up in a nice hotel, and we could spend a long weekend catching up. I was excited to reconnect with everyone. My mother was thrilled. She immediately started planning, asking about the best restaurants in Austin, the nicest hotels, the most expensive activities. She wanted to see my house, meet my girlfriend, tour my office. Then I mentioned that my girlfriend and I had been talking about starting a family soon. Maybe having kids would help me understand the importance of family bonds. The response was immediate and telling. Suddenly, my mother was full of advice about parenting, about the importance of family support systems. She mentioned how helpful it would be to have grandparents nearby, how my brother would make a great uncle. She suggested that maybe they should move to Austin permanently. They could sell their house, relocate, and be there to help with the grandchildren. My father could probably find work, and my brother was definitely interested in joining my company. I let them plan for 2 weeks. They called constantly, making arrangements, discussing logistics, talking about their future in Austin. My mother even started looking at houses online, sending me listings and asking for my opinion. Then I made my move. I called them for what I told them would be a final planning conversation. I started by thanking them for their sudden interest in my life. I mentioned how wonderful it was to feel like I mattered to them again. I told them I'd been thinking a lot about family lately, about the relationships that really matter. I'd realized that the people who truly care about you don't disappear for 3 years and then suddenly reappear when they find out you're successful. I explained that I'd built my life in Austin without them, surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. My girlfriend, my friends, my business partners, they'd all been there through the struggles and the successes. I told them the reunion was canceled. My mother tried to interrupt, to explain, to justify their behavior. She insisted they'd always cared, always been proud, always wanted to be closer. The distance had just made things difficult. I reminded her that the distance was only 3 hours by plane, and that they'd managed to visit my brother at college regularly when he was even farther away. My father got angry. He accused me of being ungrateful, of forgetting where I came from. He said family was supposed to stick together, that success should be shared with the people who raised me. I asked him what he'd shared with me during my years of struggle. What support had they offered when I was building my first company, working 18-hour days, living on savings and hope? The conversation ended with my mother crying and my father hanging up on me. My brother called an hour later. He was angry, accusatory. He told me I was being selfish, that I owed my family more than this. He said I'd always been jealous of him, and now I was using my money to hurt everyone. I asked him if he remembered a single conversation we'd had in the past 5 years that wasn't initiated by me. He couldn't. I told him that jealousy requires caring, and I'd stopped caring about his achievements years ago when I realized our parents would never care about mine. Update 1. It's been 2 months since I cut contact with my parents and brother. The silence has been both peaceful and sad. I'd hoped that maybe, just maybe, they'd reach out with a genuine apology, some acknowledgement of how they'd treated me over the years. Instead, I got something much more revealing. My aunt called last week. She'd been getting calls from my mother, asking if she knew how to reach me. Apparently, my parents had been telling extended family that I'd changed since becoming successful, that money had made me arrogant and ungrateful. They were painting themselves as the victims of my newfound wealth and attitude. My aunt, bless her, wasn't buying it. She'd watched our family dynamics for years and had always felt bad for how I was treated. She told me that my mother had asked her to convince me to reconsider the family reunion, emphasizing how much money I was wasting by staying in expensive hotels instead of investing in family. The money angle again. Always the money. But the most interesting part came when my aunt mentioned that my brother had been asking detailed questions about my business, my company structure, and my investment strategies. He'd been researching my company online, looking up my employees on LinkedIn, and asking mutual acquaintances about my lifestyle. It felt like surveillance. Then, 3 days ago, something happened that confirmed my worst suspicions about my family's motivations. I received a LinkedIn message from someone claiming to be a business journalist. They wanted to interview me about my success story, particularly focusing on my family background and how my upbringing contributed to my entrepreneurial drive. Something felt off about the message. The journalist's profile was new, with only basic information and a generic photo. When I looked closer at their connection requests, I noticed they'd recently connected with my brother. I did some digging. The email address associated with the LinkedIn profile was registered just 2 weeks ago. The phone number led to a burner phone service. My brother was trying to catfish me for information about my business and finances. I decided to play along. I responded to the journalist with interest, suggesting we set up a phone interview. I wanted to see how far he'd take this charade. The call was scheduled for yesterday evening. When it came through, I could hear the nervousness in the voice trying to disguise itself with a fake accent. My brother was asking probing questions about my company's revenue, my personal net worth, my investment portfolio, and my business partnerships. He wanted specifics, numbers, bank names, investment strategies. He claimed it was for the human interest angle of the story to show how successful entrepreneurs manage their wealth. I gave him completely false information. I told him I'd invested heavily in cryptocurrency, that most of my wealth was tied up in volatile digital assets. I mentioned fictional business partnerships and made-up investment strategies that sounded impressive but were complete nonsense. He ate it up, taking detailed notes and asking follow-up questions about my crypto portfolio and blockchain investments. At the end of the call, I asked when the article would be published and where. He gave me a vague answer about editorial timelines and publication schedules. Then I dropped the bomb. I told him it was interesting that a business journalist would have the same vocal patterns and speech habits as my brother, especially that distinctive way of saying, you know, that he'd had since childhood. The line went dead immediately. Update 2. My brother called me directly 2 hours later, furious and defensive. He accused me of being paranoid and suspicious, claiming he had no idea what I was talking about regarding any fake journalist. When I mentioned specific details from our interview that I'd never shared with anyone else, he finally broke down and admitted it. He said he was just trying to understand my business better, that maybe he could learn from my success. He claimed he wasn't trying to scam me or steal information. He just wanted to know how I'd made it, so he could follow a similar path. I asked him why he didn't just call and ask directly instead of creating an elaborate fake identity to trick me. His answer was revealing. He said he knew I wouldn't help him after our last conversation, so he had to find another way to get the information he needed. The information he needed, not one I needed. I pressed him on this, and the truth came out. My parents had been pressuring him to find out more about my finances and business operations. They'd convinced him that as family, he had a right to know about my success, and that I was being selfish by not sharing details about my wealth. They'd been planning to use whatever information he gathered to approach me again, this time with specific business proposals and investment opportunities that would benefit them. My mother had apparently been researching franchise opportunities and small business investments, hoping to convince me to fund her entrepreneurial dreams. My father had been looking into real estate investments in Austin, planning to ask me to co-sign on properties or provide down payments. They weren't just hoping to reconnect with their successful son. They were planning to use me as their personal bank. The fake journalist scheme was their way of gathering intelligence for their financial pitch. I told my brother I was disappointed, but not surprised. This was exactly the kind of behavior I'd expected from our family once money entered the equation. He got defensive again, insisting that family should help family, that my success was partly due to the foundation they'd provided me growing up. I reminded him that the foundation they'd provided was years of neglect, dismissal, and emotional absence. I'd built my success despite their parenting, not because of it. He hung up on me, but not before saying that I'd regret cutting off my family, that money couldn't buy the relationships I was throwing away. The irony was lost on him. Update 3. It's been another month, and I thought the drama was over. I was wrong. Yesterday, I received a certified letter from a law firm representing my parents. They're threatening to sue me for financial elder abuse and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The letter claims that by cutting off contact and refusing to provide financial support, I'm causing them significant emotional and financial hardship. It alleges that I have a moral and legal obligation to help my aging parents, and that my refusal to do so constitutes abuse. The most absurd part is their claim that I fraudulently induced them to believe I would provide financial support by initially agreeing to the family reunion, causing them to make financial plans and commitments based on expected assistance from me. They want compensation for their emotional suffering and financial losses resulting from my cruel and manipulative behavior. I called my lawyer immediately. After he stopped laughing, he explained that their case has no legal merit whatsoever. Adult children have no legal obligation to provide financial support to parents who are capable of supporting themselves. The emotional distress claim is equally baseless. But the letter revealed something important. My parents are apparently in financial trouble. My lawyer did some research. My parents took out a second mortgage on their house 6 months ago. My father's small business has been struggling, and they've been using credit cards to maintain their lifestyle while supporting my unemployed brother. They've been counting on my money to solve their financial problems. The timeline makes sense now. They discovered my wealth right around the time their financial situation became desperate. Their sudden interest in reconnecting wasn't about family love, it was about financial survival. My lawyer sent a response letter making it clear that any further legal threats would result in a countersuit for harassment and abuse of process. He also mentioned that if they continued this behavior, I'd be forced to document their pattern of financial manipulation and emotional abuse for potential restraining order proceedings. I haven't heard from them since, but I did hear from my aunt again. She told me that my parents have been reaching out to extended family members, trying to gather support for their ungrateful son narrative. They've been telling relatives that I've abandoned my family in their time of need, that success has made me cold and heartless. Most of our relatives have been polite but non-committal. They remember how my parents treated me growing up, and they're not buying the victim story. However, a few family members have reached out to me directly. My cousin asked if the stories were true, if I'd really cut off my parents completely. When I explained the situation, she wasn't surprised. She remembered how invisible I was at family gatherings, how all conversations centered around my brother's achievements while mine were barely acknowledged. She told me that several relatives had noticed the pattern over the years, but hadn't said anything out of politeness. Now that the truth was coming out, they were sharing their own observations about my parents' favoritism and my brother's entitlement. It was validating to hear, but also sad. All those years, people had noticed how I was treated, but no one had spoken up. As I'm writing this, I realized that cutting off my family was the best decision I've made in years. The peace I feel now, the absence of their drama and manipulation, has been worth more than any relationship they were offering. I've built a real family here in Austin, friends who celebrate my successes without expecting anything in return, a girlfriend who loves me for who I am, business partners who respect my contributions, and a community that values my presence. My parents spent years teaching me that I didn't matter to them. I finally learned the lesson. The funny thing about money is that it doesn't change who people are, it just reveals who they've always been. My parents showed me their true priorities, and I wasn't on the list until I became profitable. I'm done being their backup plan, their emergency fund, their last resort when their golden child couldn't deliver what they needed. They wanted to know if money would make me remember they exist. It did. It helped me remember exactly why I'd been better off when they didn't exist in my world. Some bridges are meant to be burned, especially when they only lead back to people who never valued the journey you took to build them.